Hello, everybody, and welcome to Working Remotely with GP. This is part two of, I don't know, two, maybe more parts. We'll see how today goes. I've invited some really cool guests with me today, so we should be being able to see a lot of really interesting things. I want to let everyone know right at 3 o'clock, right when this starts, there's a storm starting. It's pouring down rain in South Carolina. Last week, if the pandemic wasn't enough, we lost power one day for 6 hours. So that would fit right in with the topic of conversation should that happen again. So we'll cross our fingers it doesn't happen. Because of the amazing panel of experts that I brought in today, I want to point out this is not a sponsor webinar, but I am going to let them talk a little bit about their company, but I'll talk about that more in a moment. We're going to have some rapid sessions, and we're going to be talking about the specifics of the different products that you use to connect to your remote GP data. So the experts that I brought in, and these probably are the three best experts in all of the GP space for working remotely. There's Steve Tanner from Data Resolutions, Chris Dopkins from Power GP Online, also you might know it as Ingevity, and there's Tyler Durner from WattServe. So we even brought in a Canadian on this one. So we're a little international. So I promised that they're going to give you like a 10-minute quick round session about something really important and generic, no matter what you use. And then I told them all I would ask them this question and give them a little bit of time. What would they tell a prospective customer if they wanted to begin hosting with their company right now? So they'll talk a little bit about their company, but this really isn't a sponsor session. This is about making it easier for you to understand what it takes to work remotely with GP. I love Rosanna Dana. Some of you that are older might know who she is or who the character is. And her big saying was, it's always something. And this is true when it comes to working. There are things wherever you live, nobody is safe from it, that could potentially cause you to have to work from home for a reason or another. Hurricanes, floods, I forgot tornadoes, earthquakes, terrorist attacks, and illness or a pandemic. And terrorist attack is why I really kind of brought this in. I was in New York City on 9/11, and I recall the people who used GP that were in the downtown area where not only could they not go to their office no longer existed, and neither did their network or the wiring even, or a keyboard or a mouse. So we all need to be prepared to work from home. This is so important for anything. It could just be you have a bad cold and you don't want anyone else in the office to catch it. And it's respectful to do that. So you could just work from home perhaps. So this is why this is so important to me and why I'm bringing this to you today. We're going to go ahead and dive right into our first presenter, Mr. Steve Tanner. And Steve, I think you're going to be talking about, let me go ahead and stop my slideshow. You've got a whole variety of things that you're going to be talking about. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it is. Thank you very much, Belinda.
Yep.
Nice to be with everybody.
Stop sharing while you begin sharing. Now you can see our panel experts in their workspaces, wherever they happen to be in the world. So go ahead, Steve,
Hello,
go for it. Yep, we see you.
Thanks so much. Well, Belinda, this is kind of fun to get everybody together wherever you happen to be in the country or in the world today. So I'm in Southern California, and today happens to be one of those record-breaking mid-90s spring days. It's unusual to have it that way today, but we were dealing with rain and storms just a few days ago. So what I wanted to do is kind of kick it off with some of the topics that often come up during this time in our society where there's something unusual that's occurred. Now, this is a big thing, but only a few years ago we were dealing with hurricanes and floods in Orlando and things going on in Texas. And so as Belinda said earlier, it's always something. So I've got a small presentation set up. It'll be roughly 10 minutes or so content. And then I think Belinda had a question that I wanted to answer, and I'll be happy to go through that with you as well. So just a little background on how I got into this interesting business. I started off as a young guy with less gray hair and more of it, and got a Bachelor of Science degree in business and focused in finance. And somewhere along the way, I came upon the opportunity to work with Dynamics. I was helping a client, and they were looking at a new accounting system. And this is back in the early 90s. So we're measuring almost 27 years since I got my first box of software with the word Dynamics on it. Time went on, and as we got ready for the Y2K experience, a lot of people were thinking about either buying new hardware or hosting. So our first projects were in 1999, and it seems like only yesterday in some ways, but the concepts are the same. The world is different in a sense, but the tools that we use are a little more elaborate, but the same principles apply. And as I was, my first child came in 1998, and right around that time I was working on my Master's of Science degree in EDP auditing, electronic data processing, not a term we use every day, but it's basically securing information and making sure that the inputs match what the output should be. And so definitely have a focus in that. And during all of this time, I've been working with partners and clients to master the cloud, what we're now calling the cloud. And many of you may be aware of all the details, so hopefully between Tyler, myself, and Chris, we'll be able to educate you a little bit more. So what Belinda wanted us to focus on a little bit today is helping you be a little bit more confident about your choices around hosting Dynamics GP remotely. Some of you may be using tools such as TeamViewer or PC Anywhere or VPNs, etc. So I'll talk a little bit about what those scenarios look like. I'd like to highlight some best practice alternatives, which would be potentially hosting either on your own or with a team like ours, your Dynamics GP solution, and highlight also some of the scenarios to think about when you're dealing with your ISV solutions, and then kind of a big chunk of time around backups and disaster recovery. So I'll jump right in. So for those of you that are using a PC to PC remote device like TeamViewer or PC Anywhere or LogMeIn, they've been around, many of them, for a long time. I remember PC Anywhere when it used to be a dial-in situation with one modem on my end and a dial-up modem on the other. And really those solutions are pretty decent, in my opinion, for occasional remote access, but they're not necessarily ideal for long-term or permanent access when you've got a larger workforce trying to access an ERP system. Some of the things that I wanted to highlight today is that when you're dealing with these tools, if your office internet is down, of course you can't work, because you don't have a connection to those devices. Separately, if a workstation restarts and doesn't fully come back up again, you can't access it unless it's fully powered up. For those of you that are doing service packs, maybe for payroll purposes or new features that you want to enable, each one of your workstations needs to be upgraded or updated at the, and that can't be done very conveniently when you're dealing with potentially dozens across an office. Also, the idea that if you've got a workstation at home, now you need a separate workstation in the office to be able to connect to your GP system. So if you're a 10-user environment, you need at least 20 devices, right? One at each remote location and then one to connect to at the office. I know some people try to do many to one, but that's not really practical when you're doing full-on production work throughout a busy work week. And then there's also the topic of network security and disaster recovery. If something goes wrong with either your device at home or the one at the office, you could either lose data or lose productivity along the way, and potentially have incursions. And I think Chris will be talking a little bit about that later. Some people have asked, well, how about I just create a VPN connection between my home laptop or my remote workstation and the SQL server? Well, for those of you that are using the desktop client of GP, you know that it's a client-server application. So what that means is having your GP client and the database on the same network, and hopefully on a big network connection, is really how the solution is designed. So when you're trying to connect a workstation over the internet, because the internet doesn't have the same speed as your business office network connection, it doesn't really result in great performance. So usually you'll end up with lag times. Sometimes systems will disconnect unexpectedly, and you could end up with batches stuck or transactions not occurring as they should be. So what are some of the alternatives? Well, for many of you, you may have remote desktops at your office, but others may not. So I wanted to highlight a little bit of the tools that we all work with within our hosting community. So Windows Remote Desktop is well known. Citrix is also well known, may not be as commonly used, but also a very secure way to connect to your GP solution. And for those of you where it's the right fit, the web client for GP is another option. So it doesn't really matter which one of those you choose. There are some considerations that you need to think about. So the section in blue is something that, irrespective of whether you're hosting or doing something in-house, you and your Dynamics partner are focusing on three major categories: data migration and upgrade responsibilities, service packs, and then any ISV setups and configurations. The items in yellow are things that you today are probably responsible for if you're a client listening in, or if you're a partner that provides some of these services, you're handling these. So that's optimizing your infrastructure, tuning your database, disaster recovery, hopefully around the Dynamics platform, dealing with server operating system patches, and then planning for growth or change within your infrastructure, along with security planning and managing your infrastructure costs. The areas that kind of shift into the green, where you're either using a public cloud or Azure or AWS, would be server scalable infrastructure, redundant bandwidth, geographic redundancy, and electrical power redundancy. So those are like the laundry list of things that as a community we have to focus on to make sure that you've got a good solution. So if you're doing it in-house or on-premise, you're handling 100% of everything in yellow, and you and your partner are generally doing the things in blue. If you decided you wanted to host with Azure or AWS on your own, you would still be responsible for all the sections in yellow, though Microsoft or AWS or another vendor might provide the solutions in green. Of all the partners that are on the call today, the hosting partners, we all, for the most part, handle all the items in green on the far right column. So that's managing the cloud environment for Dynamics. And some of us do it strictly in a private cloud model. Some of us do it in a combination with Azure or AWS or other solutions. So just because you're going to the cloud doesn't mean you lose all your responsibilities. It just means you're shifting them to another person or another provider. So the reason I bring that up is when you're bringing a solution to a hosted environment, most organizations are going to be looking at some shared in their deployment model. So this is an example of a network where there's an Active Directory, file server, backup hosts, and intrusion management across multiple clients, and then specific equipment dedicated to you as the customer. So in our case, we use Citrix as our platform, but this could say remote desktop server farm and a private SQL instance. So those are dedicated to your organization. Most of you will have an SA password in this situation, and depending on whether you're using the GP web client, that could be on a shared platform or dedicated to your situation. So in this example, the responsibilities you're shifting are all of these components that are related to the GP platform. So anything related to security, virus and intrusion management, backups, etc., would be handled this way. For some of you that have more complex environments, it's important to consider that you might want or prefer to have a mostly private environment where you might have a dedicated domain controller that is specific to your company for single sign-on. It also allows you to extend the domain that you have at your current office into our data center or our cloud. For some of you might have an app server for special projects or special usages, a web server for functions that are important for that capability, and then a SQL server. So those pieces in this scenario are dedicated as virtual machines to you as a client. However, things like Active Directory, file services, backups, and backup hosts can still remain as shared resources.
Steve?
And still give you a local thing. Yes?
Someone has requested that they can get a copy, about getting a copy of the deck that you created afterwards.
Happy to do it.
Yeah, so if you could send it to me, I will put a link onto the YouTube video, so you could PDF it up perhaps. And then we have a great question, but you're at your 10-minute list. Do you have any other slides after this one?
I'm already at 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to touch on this topic very quickly, and then I'll jump into the question you wanted me to answer.
Deal.
So about disaster recovery, I just want everybody to remember that disaster recovery is more than a backup. So, for example, fire and related damage, a backup cannot be restored in this environment. The servers are gone, potentially gone in a leaky building or rain or water damage. Same with flooding. These are unusable servers. Earthquake, probably not survivable for most of this equipment. And then with ransomware, it may also not allow you to actually restore in this environment. So what you really need to think about is your recovery time, how long can you afford to be down, and how much data can you afford to lose. So those are the two major categories of disaster recovery. And I've got some charts that kind of describe the cost impact as you're trying to make your recovery time shorter and your recovery point shorter. So in some cases, the data size and your data sources make an impact. In other cases, it is the complexity of the environment that impacts it. So in a hosted environment, we're able to, because we manage these things on a day-to-day basis, help you become a lot more confident that things are going to happen appropriately. And all of us do offer this concept of a disaster recovery site. So even though our systems may go down or for whatever reason they're offline, there is an alternative option for you. So that's something to think about. Because when I showed you those pictures of a flooded or burnt out data center, if you can't use that equipment, you can't be running, even though you have a backup. You need a place to recover it to. So you had a question. If somebody wanted to jump
So
on,
the question is, what would you tell a prospective customer if they wanted to begin hosting with your company right away during this pandemic?
Good question. Thank you. So if you're ready to host GP, how do you start? So I was thinking, of this phrase that I've heard more than once in the construction trade: measure twice and cut once. What it basically means is do a little bit of planning, and it'll really save a lot of trouble later. So I've got a document that I'll share with the team as well that covers these high-level items. Evaluate your workloads, verify how much broadband that you have, collaborate on a migration plan, confirm your maintenance and support strategy, make sure you understand the financial impacts, and then establish a timeline. So that's actually a little document that I have right here. I think I can bring it up. And this will be available to the group as well. I've got it in a spreadsheet format, so you can actually build it out yourself. But it highlights all the different sections that would be important for us to be aware of as we're building a plan with you, and to hopefully get you to the point where this makes a business case and makes sense for you and your team.
I appreciate you bringing in a lot of those things to watch out for, and especially pointing out why the backup, the disaster recovery, the fact that you can't restore a backup.
Yep, exactly. A backup is great if you have a place to send it, but otherwise you don't. And I think I would just coordinate with, make sure your Dynamics partner is in the loop on this discussion, as well as your staff. Don't forget to test and validate the process, and that's part of our process in bringing you online. And then once you go live, usually this process could be a few days to a few weeks, depending on the complexity of your situation. And here's some resources. This was an article I published for GPUG a couple of years ago. It looks like they just updated it recently, putting it online. So it's available without a GPUG subscription. So you can go to the cloud and prepare like a pro. Your Dynamics partner will also be able to help you. And this is my direct contact information.
Well, thanks so much for sharing. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Belinda.
Yeah, and I appreciate you being part of this this little thing that makes me all happy. So let me get to my next slide here, and let me find my teams and share. So that wraps up Steve's quick talk. And it's funny because Chris and I were talking before this started. So I saw him smile when I called you 10 minutes, Steve, because we were laughing. We're like, of course, with the two of us on a call, we have to have a time. Otherwise, we would talk forever. So Chris, everybody now welcome for the next topic, Mr. Chris Dobkins from Power GP Online, also known as Ingevity, and he's going to be talking about some of the things about working from home. Is that right, Chris? Let me go ahead and you got. Yep, we can see your screen just fine. Although we can't hear you.
Yes.
There you
Yeah,
go.
thanks,
Okay.
Linda. I wanted to just talk to our community a little bit about 5 things they can do to be a little more secure when they work from home. Now that we're all suddenly working from home, and not only are we kind of suddenly working at home, but this happened overnight, right? We had very little time to prepare to everybody work at home. It was everybody all at once. So it's been a real challenge for our IT guys to get all of this done for all their customers all at one time. And what this has effectively done is it's created a massive increase in the surface area that's available for hackers to try and exploit. It's created a huge increase in the use of non-standard software and procedures, as we've all had to make adjustments in how we work and where we work. And and it's created a sense of panic and chaos in some senses, which are all really great ingredients for surge and cyber attacks. In fact, our security partner has told us they've seen a tenfold increase in cyber attacks just over the last 3 months. It's pretty significant. Daniel Marcuson has even said, this may be the most dangerous time to be online, and yet here we all are online from our homes. So in order to help us be more secure as we work from home, our first tip is to make sure your remote desktop is secure. In order to do that, you really want to have a remote desktop gateway server. This allows you to not have your remote desktop servers connected to the internet. And it makes the environment much more secure. In fact, if you're not using a remote desktop gateway server, when you type your password in, it's going across the network in plain text. So really, really good idea if you're using remote desktop to have this gateway. If you don't have a gateway, having a VPN open to your office is also a secure way to run remote desktop. If you have opened up port 3389 on your firewall, if this was your IT department solution to getting you to work remotely, this is extremely unsecure. In fact, RDP ports are well-known attack vectors for hackers, and it's really easy for them to exploit this. So you really don't want to have that. And if you think you maybe outsmarted the bad guys by changing your RDP port to something else, the bad guys have tools that allow them to scan every port on your firewall and tell what services are running behind it. So changing the port really doesn't help. You've really got to be either VPN or using one of these gateways. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, don't click that. Just don't. We have seen a 667% increase in coronavirus phishing attempts just over the month of March. Many of these have to do with things like exploiting people's confusion around coronavirus relief checks, or they're impersonating the Centers of Disease Control. Now that we're all using different technology for our phone systems, you may be getting a lot of phishing attempts that say you have a new voicemail and click here to listen to it. And of course, there's always the old standard, you've got to track a package to track. It's really important right now that as you receive emails that you look at who the sender is, not just the name, but the actual email address, to make sure that it's coming from a person that you think it's coming from before you click on any links in those emails. We're also seeing a fairly significant increase in spear phishing. And you may say, spear phishing, what is that? Spear phishing is when the bad actor takes the time to research you and they are specifically attacking you or your company. We've seen this in many cases where we've seen this at our business, where our accounting department will get an email from me, it appears, asking them to wire money to a particular bank account very quickly. Usually these emails come when I am out of the office and traveling. So these spear phishers, they figure out your schedules. They learn the people's names within your company, and then they really try to exploit that specifically. And so this is also on the rise. So if you get an email, your spidey sense goes off, send a text, send an IM, and just confirm that what you're being asked for is legitimate. Next, tip number 3 is to protect your home network. We have now as all of us are working from home, our home networks are a new attack vector, and can be a real weak point in the security of our organizations. One of the biggest recommendations we have, and we've had this since before the pandemic, is to have a separate router for your work, a separate Wi-Fi network, not just a separate network, but a whole separate physical device. Especially if you have kids in the house that are gaming and streaming and chatting. There are a lot of ways for malware to enter your systems through some of these devices that our kids are very into, and you don't want that to bleed into what's happening on your work side. Next, you definitely want to change the admin password on your router. The National Institute for Science and Technology is recommending 16 to 24 characters now for all passwords. The old 8-character password that we've all been accustomed to for the last decade can now be hacked in about 3 days, whereas one that's this long takes about 1 trillion years. So this is the new recommendation. We recommend the same for your Wi-Fi password for your network. For your actual network name, don't use your default. When I scan Wi-Fi on my device, I see a lot of like Netgear 44, Netgear 22. In about 2 seconds, I can go on the internet and I can find the default admin credentials for Netgear or any manufacturer, and then potentially take control of your network. And also, don't use anything that's personally identifiable, like your name or address or phone number. People driving around in a van on the street can see that stuff, and then they know where you live. Additionally, you want to make sure that you turn off features on your router like plug and play and remote management and WPS, because these things just make it easier for people to get into your network. And you want to turn on features like the router firewall, which make it harder for people to get to your network. And then, as with all your devices, we're going to recommend that you keep them updated. Your routers have software, they call it firmware, that runs them, and you want to keep that updated to make sure they're safe. Tip number 4, don't be a victim of Zoom bombing. This is another one of those fun little words that has now joined our lexicon, like flatten the curve and social distancing. Zoom bombing is a brand new thing where bad actors hijack your meetings on Zoom. We've seen this a lot with some online school and others that have been using Zoom lately, where someone will come into your meeting, they'll post inappropriate content, or maybe put links in the chat that take you to malware. So ways you can avoid this if you're using Zoom: set meeting passwords, use random meeting IDs. Don't use your personal meeting ID. Just the best practice with Zoom. Use the random ones. Enable the waiting room so you can control who is able to come into your meeting. Control who can share in chat. So not just anyone can share their screen and whatever might be on it. And you can also lock your Zoom meeting. So once all of your attendees have arrived, you can lock it so no additional folks can get in. Or you could also just switch to Microsoft Teams. This is what we use, and it doesn't have any of these security issues. That's what we're using right now for this cast, in fact. And finally, our 5th and final tip: work is for work. Don't share your work computer with your kids, your partner, anyone. You don't want folks on the computer that you use for work connecting to your business's data. You don't want people gaming, streaming, chatting, doing online school, potentially getting Zoom bombed and having malware installed. The more people who access your device, the more potential it has to be compromised. So those are my 5 tips.
You finished.
Linda, you
finished
I
early.
finished early. Can you
But
believe that?
I have a question. Was it you who told me about talking to someone who actually does all their banking on even a separate PC?
Yes. Yeah. I had a conversation with someone who used to work at the NSA, And she not only she had 3 separate Wi-Fi routers in her home. She had one for her kids, one for her and her husband, and another one that they used for their online banking.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay, so now it's time for your question.
sure.
What would you tell a prospective customer if they wanted to begin hosting with your company ASAP?
Well, the first thing I would tell them is that if you currently use Dynamics GP, that Power GP Online is the right path to the cloud for you. This is an environment that we've created specifically for Dynamics GP customers. You get to keep all your data, you get to keep all your ISV solutions and customizations, all the functionality and business processes. You also get all the new cloudy features that we've added to Dynamics GP. And you don't have any expensive time-consuming implementation projects. And plus you get the world-class security and ransomware protection that we offer for Dynamics GP. This is a much better option than looking at switching to some other ERP system. And I would also tell you that we're able to all we need is your GP database backups. If you're trying to move to the cloud very quickly, it can be done in a day. It's really fast and easy. Of course, if you've got a really complex environment, as Steve mentioned, planning can help make it go smoother. But if you're in a hurry, we can certainly help you. Now, Power GP Online is not just Dynamics GP in the cloud. We've put a lot of time and effort into making Dynamics GP better in the cloud. We've added things like Power GP Protect, which is our backup and disaster recovery systems. We've built the system on top of the Microsoft Identity Management Framework, so you can add security features like multi-factor authentication, which just make GP so much more secure. We've created new import tools. We've created next generation APIs, so you can really easily do cloud-to-cloud integrations. And we've added a significant number of new features to Power GP as well. So for example, one of the things we've done is we've modified the payables transaction entry window. So you can see over here on the right side, we've added this vendor activity pane that just gives you a little more contextual information about the business you've done with this vendor as you're entering a transaction. We've also added a new import utility. You may have noticed when you're looking at the AP entry window, there's an import button on it. Power GP import surfaces up on every window in Dynamics GP that you can import data to, and there's well over 20 different places that you can do that. Once you open the import, it's very, very simple to just connect into an Excel file and load it up. We validate everything through eConnect and then push the data into GP through eConnect as well. All just built right inside the interface of Dynamics GP. We've also created a reset batch status utility. If you ever have those issues where it says this batch has been marked for posting, but it isn't really, this little utility that we've created makes that problem go away. And all these things that we've done are free to all of our Power GP Online customers. You just get this stuff. You don't have to pay any extra for it. And then, one of the other things that we've done, and we're in the process of releasing right now, is a new application called Power GP Banking. If you've ever, wanted that, really cool QuickBooks feature where you could just connect right up to your bank and download all your transactions and then compare them to what's already inside of GP, and create transactions automatically for the ones that you designate that need to be created. That's exactly what Power GP Banking is. It's a really easy little tool that allows you to do just that. It's a game changer for Dynamics GP, and we're really excited about it. And then finally, I would say, if you are struggling with working remotely and you need to get to the cloud quickly, we're running a promotion at the moment. For if you want to if you already own Dynamics GP, you can bring your Dynamics GP licenses to the cloud. We're waiving the setup fees, and we're offering a 20% discount for your 2 months, for the first 2 months to help the process of getting there be that much easier for you. So Belinda, that is what I would tell someone if they were interested in getting to the cloud right away.
Those are some great answers. So thanks for sharing that. And I really appreciate I really appreciate that. Sorry, I keep looking around, but my monitors are behind me. I'm trying to prevent everyone from seeing my bed. So that's what I'm doing when I turn. So thank you, Chris. I really appreciate that. And let's see. I'm going to come in, and you should now be seeing Tyler Durner's picture. Tyler is our Canadian, so that we've added in. It's all in North America, so it all works just fine. So Tyler is going to continue the discussion. So we've talked about different options that are available as far as connecting. We've talked about some of the gotchas with security and things that you need to watch for. Now we're going to talk about how working in the cloud can minimize disruptions. So Tyler, why don't you take over?
Thanks, Belinda. This is a little different scenario. I'm used to doing this at the user groups and the summits in front of a group full of people. So doing this for my dog laying in the basement office here is a little bit different. So I'm sure he's going to be thrilled to learn about how the cloud can minimize business disruption. So I'm going to kind of take a little different spin on this, obviously being GP centric, but also talking about cloud in general and kind of some of the benefits that it can bring to an organization.
Tyler?
And or not. Yes.
We see the PowerPoint, not the slide. So I don't know if you're sharing the wrong thing or if you're just demoing the way I do a PowerPoint a lot.
I'm probably just doing it with, here, let me go into.
Which is fine with me and fine with
Okay.
most people. So
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
just run with it this way because I may end up in presenter mode or something that's going
okay,
to mess
that's
things
cool.
up.
Keep on going.
All right. So over the last 6-8 weeks, kind of thinking back on GP, and I mean, I started in the GP channel about 16 years ago, and really not much has changed in how we deploy GP, right? I mean, back then, most users had local workstations, maybe a CFO or controller would carry a laptop, but most users came in, they did their thing from 9 to 5, and they left. And when they left the office, they left the office. You know, I look back then, and we used to recommend all of our customers do Citrix-based deployments, even if everybody was in the same office, just because it made change management easier, right? If you're doing service packs, if you're doing updates, you know, they only had to do it once instead of having to go around to every different end user and kind of roll out those changes. But you know, and if you look at an architecture perspective for GP, they're still fundamentally kind of the same, right? It's a single server, it's an application or a SQL server, an application server, and then the clients access it. You know, I don't know how many times we've come across customer deployments where we go, okay, it's time to do, you know, your cloud migration and, you know, give us your last backup for testing purposes. And they go, oh yeah, I think our IT guy handles that, and then they find out their systems haven't been backed up in weeks, months, sometimes years. And I'd make a generalization that most customers would kind of fall into some mashup of these scenarios, you know. But at the end of the day, GP hasn't changed, your business hasn't changed, but what has changed? What's changed is the way that we can do these deployments in a much more sophisticated manner today than any customer could previously imagine if they've been a long established running GP customers, right? You look at some of the stuff that, you know, Microsoft is doing from an Azure perspective, and I mean, they're sinking billions upon billions of dollars into this technology stack that GP customers can take advantage of, but most just aren't for some reason. And I think I've heard Microsoft say this many, many times, you know, who spends more on security, or who can spend more on security at an infrastructure level? You, Mr. Customer, or Microsoft? I think the answer is pretty evident. So how can you use some of this stuff? And in the last 6-8 weeks, as I've kind of been thinking of this, looking back on my almost 7 years here at WatServe, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with a customer that said that involved the word pandemic or something that wasn't a natural disaster. I think we've all kind of hinted at it at different points, right? It's always been earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, but this is the first time where the disaster has been human, right? This is the first, everybody always planned on what if something happens to my data? when this is the first case where your data is still where it was, you just can't get at it anymore. So how can you use the cloud to minimize these things? So, you know, from a local hardware impact perspective, it's funny, I actually saw an article not that long ago that I thought was relevant, that the local police station here where I live, when this whole thing broke out, as Chris said, we were all forced to kind of flip over to a remote workforce like that. They had to go out and spend like $300,000 on laptops because nobody worked remotely. So if you look at, when customers and companies are going to be looking at their next hardware upgrade cycle, I have a hard time believing anybody's going to be buying local desktops anymore. Everybody's going to be going laptop based just in case people need to work from home. I mean, that is going to be a new reality going forward. Not only are customers now planning for natural disasters, but they're going to have to start planning around pandemics. And a big one that, I think has been kind of what Chris introduced it in the last session there is ransomware and malware, right? That is the biggest threat to your business is normally it's simple human error, right? It's double clicking the wrong email. It's opening the wrong attachment. I'll use an example of, my boss, my CEO's name is Dave. One of my best friends' name is Dave. It would be very easy for me to, send a sales forecast to, I hit DA into Outlook and it goes to my friend Dave instead of my boss. Nothing malicious, but it's technically something that's gone wrong. But looking at it from two perspectives, both from a ransomware and a malware and also working remotely and minimizing business disruption, but some very simple things you can do, which is using cloud storage for files and for sharing, right? There's no need to have a local file server that's sitting on-prem anymore with OneDrive, with Box, with Google Drive, with SharePoint Online. I mean, there are so many different ways that can help your business just by simply getting your files off-prem. Not only does it help in the case of, COVID-19 and people having to work remotely, and if their files were sitting on a local file server, how do they get at them? They can do that remotely now. But it also helps by getting those files off your local network in the case of a malware attack that now they're almost kind of like not reachable. So it's kind of dual purpose. It's really cost effective. It adds a ton of security to your organization from a disruption perspective, both from disaster recovery. You can replicate those files into multiple facilities if something happens at a data center level, accessing those files remotely all of a sudden in the case of COVID-19, and also from a ransomware perspective. Some of the other things that you can do with the cloud to minimize disruption is, you can replicate data to multiple data centers, frankly, by just selecting a different storage type. And I mean, we're looking at this from an Azure perspective, given this is a GP focused session, but you can do the same sort of things in AWS, in Google, and any of the large kind of private cloud providers. But the flexibility and the options you have to push your stuff around and also keep it very, very secure is frankly something that you can't realistically do on-prem. And even if you do have a fundamental requirement or need to store files locally for some reason, you can very easily replicate those things off-prem in the event of a disaster. Azure Site Recovery is a tool that we use all the time for replicating both workloads and data offline. That is kind of, frankly, a no-brainer at this point, given the price point that Microsoft charges for data storage. And coming back to GP, Chris said it in the last one, but, multi-factor authentication and single sign-on are kind of a no-brainer everywhere else in your organization, being it for CRM or Outlook or any of these other, or SharePoint. I don't really care where you go with this, but why not GP, right? It's your financial system, it's your data. Why wouldn't you look to use some cloud-based technologies to improve the security and user experience? Some of the other things from an optimization and a cost perspective that you can do very easily in Azure is auto scaling of resources, right? So if you're an organization that only works from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, using auto scaling and resources, you can turn the servers off when you're not using them. right? Azure is billed by the minute, and so the less minutes you use it, the less minutes you pay for. So there's so much flexibility that you can do in a cloud-based environment, and you can do these on your own. You don't need Steve, you don't need Chris, you don't need me. You can do all of these different things on your own. But this technology is out there that most GP customers are just not taking advantage of. And talking to a bunch of different partners and different people, as we start getting back to normal and people are starting to look forward to, okay, when can we start to open things up and what does this look like? And I've heard multiple phases of plans. The cloud, I think, is going to be a massive key component to business strategy going forward. I think any internal IT teams who say, we want to go buy some servers and deploy them on-prem, they're probably going to be looking for new jobs coming up here. So I think most business leaders are going to be going, look, get everything off-prem, get it into the cloud, find the right companies that we can use for this, because at the end of the day, you want to focus on running your business. Your focus shouldn't be running your business systems. Like, either outsource that using your own internal teams, leveraging, again, Azure, AWS, Google, cloud service providers, whoever, what you need it to be, but, focus on your business, not the business systems.
And we're at the 10 minutes.
Perfect.
So the question is for you. What would you tell a prospect or customer that was interested in going to the hosting solution with you right now?
Awesome. Here's the contract. No, I'm kidding. No, I think it's a blend of everything that you've heard from Steve and from Chris already. I mean, we're happy to help, but let's do it the right way, right? Like, let's understand why you're looking to do this cloud migration, right? Is it a performance problem? Is it a functionality problem? Is it a user problem? Is it a BI problem? Like, what is at the root of why you're looking to do this? Is it to facilitate a version upgrade? There are many, many different reasons why customers would want to go to a cloud-based deployment. And depending on what those business drivers are, will push us down a different path. What does a successful end state look like? Is it, the cheapest possible solution to drive down cost? Is it better performance? Is it better reliability? Is it better security? Is it reporting? Is it end user? Like, there are so many different variables, and no two are the same. No two GP customers is the same, from data size to user counts to industry to ISV products. And we really try to tailor our solutions to our customers' business needs and drive the value that they're looking for from the outcome.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Wow. You guys are the experts for a reason. So I have a lot of questions. So mostly for me, based on things that you came up with. But there was a question for Steve. Jeff wanted you to provide examples of when it might be better to host GP on AWS versus Azure, seeing that GP is a Microsoft product.
Well, it's kind of a loaded question, because if you ask the question of an AWS group, they'd say, well, Azure wouldn't be as strong. Well, I think the most neutral answer to that is it doesn't really matter, as long as the platform that you're choosing is tuned appropriately for what you're trying to get accomplished. And though we didn't get into it on any of our conversations, what's kind of important to remember is a very simple platform, maybe the choices aren't as important, but a more complex environment might need things like VPNs. It may need some separate disaster recovery scenarios. So I don't know if it's a choice between AWS and Azure. I think it could be a private cloud provider. All of us have those choices available to you. So I feel free to reach out to any one of us or all of us and just kind of, so we can help you understand what your best choices are.
I'm going to ask all of you that question. I'm going to go to Tyler for a moment, because you brought it up. You had AWS in your slide deck as well. So do you have any additional comments to make?
The only comment that I'll make, and this is a little bit anecdotal from my team, is when we were looking at onboarding a second cloud provider, we kind of evaluated the big three. I mean, obviously we're Azure based, and we evaluated AWS and Google. and AWS and Azure were kind of like tomato tomato. They kind of did most of the same things, although slight differences. But Google's cloud was built a lot newer. It's got some different technologies in it. If anybody out there wants to understand the differences between Azure, AWS, and Google at a more technical level, I'm happy to offer up some of my technical team to explain it in a way that I can't. But that's kind of my input on that. Is Azure and AWS are kind of the same thing, and Google is a little bit different from the other two.
Thanks. And Chris, I'm going to ask you that question a little bit different way. So what do people need to be cautious of if they're going to try to self-host on one of those systems like AWS or Azure or Google? You're muted.
Meeting best practice. Keep
Yeah.
yourself. You know, I think if your objective is to stop buying servers, but you have an IT team, and you've got people to build and manage these servers up in an Azure or AWS cloud, then I think it's a great option. I think there are a lot of folks who believe that moving to Azure not only replaces their on-prem servers, but it replaces their on-prem IT guys, and that's just not the case. Servers are up in the Microsoft cloud or the AWS cloud, but somebody still has to manage them.
Yep. Good. Thanks. And I did want to point out two things. One, Steve, you brought up not using a VPN for GP working remotely. Thank you for that, because I realized my camera was showing I wanted to do this, if you guys could see me. And because of that, I wanted to point out, Chris, when you brought up VPNs as security, you just meant for connecting to the office, not for using GP across a VPN.
Well, so what we're suggesting is put a VPN in place so your connection to your office is secure, and then run a remote desktop over that VPN. That's how you'd want to run GP in that scenario. You do not want to install GP on your computer and run it over the internet to your database.
Got it. Yes, that would.
Yep.
Yeah, that's where.
People have tried and have usually been very disappointed.
Yeah. Tyler, question. I have a question about how you handle customizations and maybe ISV products when you guys host.
Yeah, I mean, for us, there's no restrictions on ISVs, on customizations, on any of the things that you're currently doing today with your GP deployment. The way that we architect our GP and Azure solution is much the same you would do on-prem. So there is no restriction on ISVs, on customizations, integrations, any of those different components, given how we do things. And, I don't know that we have anybody, frankly, who's running the GP web client today. So it's still the same user interface that they're used to. So it's really kind of changing out the back end technology, but the end users don't really experience anything different.
Okay, cool.
I have maybe just an item on that, Belinda. I skipped over it since I
Yes, you had slides for it. Yeah.
I did have a slide on it, and to add what Tyler said. So if you have an ISV solution that requires, let's say, a barcode scanner or something like that, which is physically going to be in a building where activities are happening, and the server that's storing all that data is in the building, well, you don't really have to think so hard about it. But if that server is now in our data center or AWS or Azure, there's some considerations to deal with that. And all of us have experience in how to solve that problem.
Excellent.
Yeah.
My next question is for people who maybe a little bit on the less technical side. So you guys, several of you brought up multi-factor authentication, also known as MFA. So Chris, would you mind explaining to someone who may not quite understand what that is, what it is?
Sure. So multi-factor authentication just means that you need more than one thing to be able to authenticate yourself to a system. Typically, with MFA, we'd have two things. You'd have something you know, which is your password, and something you have, which would be your mobile device. And the way we deploy MFA, when you go to sign in, you put in your username and your password, and then it pops a little approval request up on your phone. Microsoft has a little authenticator app, It just pops up and says, "Do you approve?" And if you click yes, then it logs you right in. And this way, it keeps you much more secure if your password gets compromised by a bad actor. If they don't also have your device, they're not able to sign in.
Okay,
It's
cool.
one of the reasons we require all of our administrative accounts to have multi-factor authentication. So it makes it that much harder to compromise an admin account.
Cool. My next question for all of you is about whether or not you require use of the web client for GP. But before I ask you that, I do, like I said, Tyler's, or you guys already shaking your heads, but I do want to point out, if you haven't been a web client user, you should really try it. There is a short period of adjustment, but it is a happier life. I promise you. I hate working in the desktop now after I got used to working in the web client. So I guess all of you answered the question because you all were adamantly shaking your head. No, you do not require use of the web client. So I'm going to.
You might be the only person I've heard say that, Belinda.
Yeah.
I'll be number 2. I switched over to web client about 3 years ago, and I love it.
I really like it with that search button. That is a game changer for everything. Actually, I showed that at a user group meeting one time, and they were like, "Are they going to put that in the desktop?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't think so." But that is a game changer. And then being able to resize your font, another game changer. Anyhow, but yeah, you're right. I am in a small minority. Most people would try it and give up on it, but it's pretty cool once you get used to it. Steve, you were talking about self-hosted, or you talked a little bit about self-hosting by that really cool chart you had, where when people could go in and maybe go to a warehouse. And I made a note because in the case of you're still at risk though, and under the same circumstances of flood and hurricane and such, because I worked with a customer in New York who hosted their own. And they had they rented some rack space in one of those big computer buildings, and I had to go there several times. So if I had to go there several times, that means that someone else might have to go there several times. Would you go during a pandemic if you needed to? I don't know, and because the building was physically, in that case, that building was in Brooklyn. Would you be, could you get over there if you were working in Manhattan? I don't know. So any comments about people who are hosting themselves?
Well, I think we've covered it in conceptual ways. If you've got a team that's skilled at doing what they need to do to manage that environment, it's not the terrible choice. But I think Chris brought up an interesting slide. If the core of your business is not managing IT and managing infrastructure, then this is kind of a cost center. It's not a profit center. So though I didn't have a slide today, one of the things that we kind of observe is IT departments often get bogged down in the plumbing of just managing the environment. And those same skills could be much better applied sometimes to data analysis or building tools to help the actual core of the business be more effective. So it's not that it can't be done. It's like, I think back in the day, I changed my oil pretty regularly. I was kind of a handy young guy. And at some point I started realizing that wasn't the best use of my time. And, having a service that could kind of let me drive in, they'd vacuum my carpets, clean my windows, and get it all done in a few minutes versus me spending half a day getting all the parts, finding a place to dispose of the oil. It's almost, in a comparative way, the same type of thing. If you're going to manage your own servers, you've got to deal with all the detail and the nuts and bolts. And as soon as you buy that equipment, within a few days or weeks or months, it's outdated. There's something potentially better available. So I guess for those folks that are thinking about making that choice, it's not the only choice anymore. You've got plenty of other opportunities to shift that risk. And I think that's maybe the best answer is if you want to take the risk yourself, fine. If you'd like to shift that risk to somebody else who's an expert and does it for a living as a business and in this industry, then that may potentially be a much better value for you.
Great. That leads me into my closing, but before I do, I wanted to make one more comment. Chris, on the examples you gave of what makes a good password, I wrote a note, if your password makes you curse, it's good. So I just wrote that note down because how many times have you heard me muttering about hackers and meth heads, right?
We all kind of have to like get used to, the new normal for passwords is we're going to have password managers and we're going to have ridiculously complex passwords. Because with the pace that technology is improving, I mean, 3 days to hack an 8-character password with special characters and all of that, it's crazy.
Yep. So make your password, make your cars. The last thing I wanted to say on behalf of these 3 experts who provided an amazing amount of information in a short period of time, and thank you guys for doing it quickly and let me interrupt you, is if you haven't considered hosting before, so this is my little commercial for all 3 of them. Now we're starting to think about things that are a lot different. I noticed that people who never thought about what electricity costs at a business versus here, or whether the gas company is making more money or the electric company making more or less money. Now's a good time for you to stop and think about what your network actually costs you. You have a server, you have it in a room, probably the room is air conditioned, much cooler than the rest. So what does that storage space cost? What does that air conditioner cost? What is the cost of that machine and to keep it updated and upgraded? And it's much more telling now that you're not there in the physical office. And if you start analyzing that out, then you're probably going to find out that hosting definitely, even though it may not feel like it because you've got that monthly bill, it is by far a less expensive solution, especially over the course of a couple years. So there's huge return on investment. So if you haven't thought about it before, you should probably consider it now, because let's leave the headaches with these 3 guys, and let's not worry about things like malware, viruses, and so forth. So thank you everybody for attending. I will ask all 3 to share their slide deck, and then we'll post them on the YouTube live chat so that you could have access to it. Thank you, all 3 of you experts, very, very much. And you guys stay safe at home, and you guys stay safe where you are.
Thanks, Belinda.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Good to see
Belinda.
everybody. Take care.
You guys.